All right. Does that look better in presenter mode? Okay, perfect. Sorry about that, everybody. So I think just first, I wanted to give a little bit of an overview. I'm sure most folks on the call here are familiar with the fact that Colorado is a home rule state and that largely speaking, building codes and energy codes are adopted and enforced at the local level. But Colorado, a few years ago, passed a new law that essentially set minimum building energy codes that local governments must adopt upon any adoption or update of any other building code locally. So it doesn't necessarily set like a minimum that everyone must follow at the same time. But as local governments are adopting new building codes, there is a floor for the energy code that jurisdictions can adopt. So I guess before I step over there, I think, right now the current minimum energy codes relate to the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code. So I guess, second most recent code now that is public and available for energy codes is what is Colorado's current minimum energy code. And then there is a separate, like, kind of overlay code called the Colorado Model Electric Ready and Solar Ready Code that has pre-wiring requirements in place for future electrification of space heating, water heating, cooking, clothes drying appliances, future preparations for rooftop solar, and then future EV charging installations. So essentially all the wiring and electrical infrastructure that's required to enable those types of investments in the future. So those are Colorado's current minimum energy codes. And then what we're going to be talking about is actually where we're taking energy codes next. So the energy codes that are going to be going into effect in a couple of years from now, or about a year and a half. So the next energy code that we are currently in the process of developing right now is the Model Low Energy and Carbon Code. And this was directed through the same legislation that set Colorado's current minimum energy codes. And it really is meant to just be a further progression of energy efficiency requirements for new construction across the state. We really are looking to drive, maximizing energy efficiency and reducing carbon emissions compared to the current minimum energy code. There are several statutory directives in state law right now that are driving how our process is developing these codes and what we are prioritizing in those codes. And then it will, the goal here is that these codes will provide a combination of affordability, comfort, health, and resilient homes and buildings while, also helping to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from new construction. So as I said, this code is currently in development right now at the state level. So for those of you who are not familiar, state legislation created an independent energy code board that's appointed by the executive directors of the Energy Office and of DOLA. And that board is tasked with setting the new energy code standards for the state. They have been working for about the last year or so to develop this latest set of code requirements. And actually, as of right now, the first draft of the code is out for public comment, and it is open until February 7th. The public comment period is open until February 7th at 5 o'clock Mountain Time. Later on, after I'm done presenting, I'll be happy to drop the link to where folks can find that public comment draft if you haven't already seen it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the statute that directed the Energy Office and DOLA and this Energy Code Board to develop the next energy code really set two kind of fundamental goals for the energy code, and mostly what we'll be focusing on today. And one of those is maximizing greenhouse gas emission reductions. We want to be sure that we are making our new homes and buildings, as sustainable as we possibly can. And that we also need to make sure we're taking into account housing affordability. And so we want to make sure that there is kind of a balance between the imperative for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also making sure that Coloradans have affordable places to live. And so I just wanted to talk about a few elements where energy codes really help to drive affordability of homes. So there are a number of improvements. I think the really obvious low-hanging fruit from energy codes is energy savings. We actually reduce the amount of energy used, but there's also health, comfort, and safety improvements that energy codes contribute to, that also, make housing not only potentially more affordable, but also more comfortable, safe, and healthy places for people to live. So kind of as I said, the first kind of main low-hanging fruit that this energy code will address is trying to lower, the amount of electricity and natural gas and other potential fuels that homes and buildings may use. Um, and coming with that, you have lower utility costs as a result. Another one is, lower maintenance and insurance costs. So I'm sure many people are familiar that Colorado and, frankly, the nation's insurance rates are quite high, and are rising continuously, and particularly in states that have been prone to more severe extreme weather and natural disasters, are seeing really exponential growth in insurance rates. And there has actually been a lot of research done in some recent disasters to show that both better building codes and better energy codes can help contribute to more resilient buildings and homes, and thus, in the eyes of insurers, make those homes safer assets and lower risk, and thus, potentially have opportunities for lower insurance rates. Greater comfort can reduce the overuse of heating and cooling systems. So when you have more energy efficient building, there's fewer fluctuations in temperature, in air quality, and all of those things. And it reduces the amount of use when it comes to extra heating or extra cooling that folks might need in order to stay comfortable. Healthier indoor air quality, and so because there are you know tighter envelope around the building, there's less air infiltration that will bring in smoke or pollutants or pollen or other kinds of allergens. As you might be able to hear, I'm suffering from some of those pollen and allergens today. And so, by really making sure that we are controlling airflow in and out of buildings through better ventilation, and tighter buildings, we're actually helping to improve indoor air quality, which can reduce the implications for medical care, and visits and treatments to hospitals or urgent care facilities. And then, as I said, enhanced resilience and survivability. I think as we've seen, during the really, tragic fires in Southern California that have occurred over the last couple of weeks, there's already been some exposure to the fact that homes that were built to some of these better codes, not only in many cases survived fires, but actually protected occupants who were unable to or chose not to evacuate from, the impacts of smoke and other pollutants that were caused by those fires. So I just wanted to talk about a few things that the current energy code that we're working on right now is doing to try to essentially address the balance between affordability and maximizing energy efficiency and emissions reductions. So in looking through data collected by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, as well as some of the housing financing agencies out there, we were able to collect data that shows that in Colorado, our average house size is somewhere around 2,000 square feet. Obviously there's quite a range from smaller homes to very large homes, as you can see in that next bullet. Many of the communities that we have in the state, particularly those in mountain resort communities, often see homes that can be 30,000, 40,000 square feet. And so there's quite a range in terms of size. And along with that, there's quite a range in terms of the impact of home size and the need for affordability. There's a balance to be had because, I think generally speaking, when you have, somebody who's developing a 30,000 square foot home up in Aspen or Snowmass Village or Vail, affordability is not really a concern for those people. A lot of times those are, larger, more, wealthy individuals, and oftentimes are second, third, fourth, fifth homes for folks. And, while we're not necessarily only talking about the extremes here, generally speaking, there is more of a correlation between the need for really, focusing on affordability in those kind of smaller starter home categories, and then, being able to uh, essentially lean more towards energy efficiency and decarbonization in some of those larger properties. And so the Energy Code Board, in considering this issue, decided that they wanted to essentially have a series of different sets of requirements that would apply depending on the size of the home. And so there would be less stringent requirements, although not unstringent. There's still a need to make sure that we are having energy efficient homes, even in that starter home, more affordable, high affordability need category, but less stringent than those that would be those really larger homes. And then, kind of setting higher targets. We want more energy efficiency. We want more decarbonization. We want to be able to make sure that those really large homes where there are typically, resources able to invest in those kinds of upgrades to really dial up energy efficiency and decarbonization measures. And so based on that, these kind of, two bullets are really focused on what those requirements are for those smaller starter home categories, and then really where we're trying to dial that up in those larger homes. And so for the smaller homes, those have been defined by the Energy Code Board as less than 3,500 square feet above grade. So noting that that's only 35, if it's 3,500 square feet or less above the ground. So if there's like a basement or other kind of, space that is conditioned below grade, that would not contribute to the home size threshold here. And so, the Energy Code Board kind of set this within the intent of trying to balance identifying where our average home size is and where we might expect that more starter home category to be. And then where we start to get into where those, homes really would be considered on the larger side. And as you can see here, when we're talking about what the requirements are, generally speaking, in those smaller home categories, we're talking about fewer additional energy efficiency requirements. Or for those of you who are familiar with the HERS scoring index, which is essentially the index that rates how energy efficient a new home is, or any home, it doesn't have to be new. And there are less stringent targets that those smaller homes have to hit, or less energy savings that's required. So again, I really want to emphasize that we're not saying that these homes would not be energy efficient or that we're necessarily relaxing requirements for these smaller homes, but that we're not adding as many stringent requirements for these smaller homes. And then when you talk about those larger homes, we are trying to dial up those requirements. And so looking more at adding some extra energy efficiency requirements or energy use reductions. And so that's kind of where the Energy Code Board has really kind of broken that down and tried to maximize that affordability issue, maximize the benefit on those smaller homes of still making sure we have energy efficient homes, but reducing some of the extra requirements that might add extra cost. The other thing I wanted to mention, which really relates more to, I think, the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions aspect of the Energy Code Board's directive, but also actually has a number of benefits both for occupants as well as affordability, is electrification. I think most folks are probably familiar with the conversation around electrifying space heating. So that's like transitioning away from gas furnaces or wood stoves in some cases, propane fired appliances and things of that nature, more towards highly efficient heat pumps for space heating and water heating. And what this code is really trying to do is nudge projects in the direction of electrification, essentially give them a little bit of an incentive to want to select electric appliances as opposed to non-electric alternatives. As you can see there on the screen, there's really a number of benefits that electrification can provide that align a lot with the goals that we had identified for affordability and health and safety in that previous slide, which is increasing energy efficiency. These electric heating and cooling and water heating options are incredibly efficient in comparison to their non-electric counterparts. So they save a lot of energy and operate very efficiently. They can improve both indoor and outdoor air quality when you're not combusting a fossil fuel, there are no emissions associated in that environment. And so by switching those appliances over to electric equipment, you're reducing or completely eliminating altogether the emissions impacts that might affect indoor air quality. And then, of course, obviously, as we are combusting fossil fuels broadly, affecting outdoor air quality as well. More stable utility bills. So I think everyone is familiar that natural gas in general is cheaper than electricity. However, natural gas is also very prone to cost fluctuations. When you have strains on supply of natural gas, or you have extreme weather events that suddenly increase the demand for natural gas exponentially, the retail prices for natural gas go through the roof. We've seen that in a number of recent cold snaps in Texas and the Midwest and the East Coast, and even here in Colorado, whereas electricity prices remain stable during those events. And then, of course, as I mentioned, electrification also really helps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so there's a couple of ways in which this energy code is going to try to, again, nudge but not require electrification, is helping to kind of balance and make sure that the energy code itself is at a fundamental level, not necessarily favoring one type of equipment over another, and then add a few additional efficiency requirements that if you're using natural gas or other fossil fuel fired equipment in your home, then there are a few additional efficiency measures you have to do in order to comply with the code. And essentially, the goal there is if you want to use natural gas, the code would certainly allow that, but it wants to make sure you're using natural gas in the most efficient way possible. So I'm going to move over just to talk a little bit about some resources that the Energy Office has to support both developers and local governments in adopting these codes and implementing these codes and understanding these codes. We realize that energy codes are oftentimes newer in some communities, or seen as particularly complicated or challenging, and we want to make sure we have resources and support for developers and local governments alike to try to alleviate some of those challenges that you may face when it comes to dealing with energy codes. So the first one is that there's subject matter expert training and technical assistance that the Energy Office offers. So local governments and building industry professionals, so design professionals, builders, contractors, are all able to take advantage of these types of trainings. These trainings range from webinars to in-person training that local governments or a building firm can request, and then training on some more specific topics as well, such as blower door testing, which is testing air leakage and building tightness types of things, which are newer in the energy code in the last few years. So these resources are available through the Energy Office contracts with NORESCO, who contracts with a number of other partners, and then Xcel Energy. If you're a jurisdiction that's in Xcel Energy territory, they also have a program that we collaborate with them on, and they offer a number of trainings and resources as well. Next is the Colorado Code Helpline. So this is a live helpline. Well, not live, but it's a helpline where you can submit questions on energy codes, and that can range from what the code requires, what other codes that may be above and beyond the regular building codes require, how to look for measures that the building code might require when you're reviewing a set of plans or inspecting a new home, and how these different requirements interact with each other, and whether or not a certain approach or a certain material would comply with the code. So this code helpline is really meant to be a resource that is fairly open-ended and can provide information on really anything building code related to developers or to local governments. And we respond fairly rapidly to any questions submitted here. So I think Shannon either is dropping links in the chat here for the helpline, or we certainly will shortly. Next resource is the Energy Code Adoption Toolkit, and it's actually a little bit. The name is a little short because it not only focuses on resources that help local governments with adopting energy codes, but also provides archives of all kinds of webinars and training and data resources and analysis on energy codes, as well as resources that can help local governments enforce energy codes better. So things like checklists and guidance on different requirements of the energy code. So there's really kind of a robust set of resources in this adoption toolkit that can be really helpful both to local governments and developers alike. And then giving some examples of what kind of things we include in there in terms of resources, compliance and commissioning checklists. For those of you who are familiar with energy code compliance, ResCheck and ComCheck, which are both compliance software tools to demonstrate code compliance. Load calculation cheat sheets, so manual JDNS cheat sheets if you're like installing new heating or cooling equipment, those resources will help you figure out how to properly size that equipment. As I was saying, HERS rating versus other energy rating index information, so kind of comparing and contrasting those. Old trainings that have been done and the recordings of those trainings, changes in the energy code, technical fact sheets, decarbonization. If your community is really looking to maximize decarbonization efforts, there are resources there to support that as well. So there's all kinds of information on this toolkit, and I would highly recommend folks checking that out. So I think we kind of wanted to move next into maybe some opening for general questions. And then once we've kind of gotten through some of those, I have some targeted questions here that we hope to get some feedback. So I think if anyone asks a question live, feel free to raise your hand. I don't know if there were any in the chat that I missed. Pamela, go ahead.
Adam, thanks for the briefing. It's a big topic of discussion here with my building official on a pretty much daily basis is where we're headed with energy. So this was very useful and I appreciate it. But I do wonder, a lot of your benefits that you spoke about for the higher energy efficiency is about living in the home, and it's more affordable to live there and better to live there. But all of these requirements do add to the cost of construction and make it that much harder. I mean, under the current code, we can't hardly make an affordable house. So it's going to be very difficult to do when we have to add all the reinforcements, all the additional wiring, all the things that you're talking about, the blower door test, all of those things are things that are going to add to cost for construction. And so if it's not affordable on the construction end, it's very hard for us to make it affordable on the for someone to rent or to even buy.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean it's the age-old question when it comes to, you know, balancing kind of where those first cost implications are, which, you know, no one is denying that, you know, investments in energy efficiency do contribute to a higher first cost. So just to be clear, we recognize that, we understand that, and we agree with that assessment. I think where I think there are some misconceptions though is about whether or not it makes it less affordable to purchase a home or to rent a home. Because I think when energy codes are discussed and, you know, the cost implications of energy codes are discussed, we often talk about the payback period, you know, how long it will take for the energy savings to actually overcome the first cost of the home. And I think that is frankly it's ignoring the fact that that's not how the general population purchases properties, right? So when we're talking about, you know, maybe the energy code, you're talking about a $350,000 home, and perhaps the energy code is contributing an extra $5,000 to $10,000 in cost, depending on what code you're comparing it to. Obviously, if you're on an older code, the first costs are higher to move to these newer codes. Those costs are obviously being spread out for the vast majority of people across a 30-year mortgage. Those energy savings are also being seen across time as well. And so when we actually look at a lot of the analysis that shows the implications for those higher first costs for homeowners, in most cases with these newer codes, obviously there are exceptions, but in most cases we do see that the energy savings either matches or actually in many cases exceeds those first cost implications. So you're actually saving more on your utility bill every month because of the energy efficiency you're gaining than you are in that, whatever percentage increment difference is in your mortgage or in your, in your down payment. All of those things are actually offset on a monthly basis in most cases by energy efficiency. And so from the month to month perspective, we actually see it as being fairly cost effective in most cases. Again, with some exceptions. It is a different story, obviously, if you're talking about just outright purchasing of homes. But I also think that generally speaking, folks who are able to purchase a home with cash, I'm guessing the general consensus is that extra $5,000 is not going to be super challenging for them to achieve. But I think that there is an attempt to make sure that those monthly energy savings are trying to balance out what those first cost implications are.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Looks like we've got Kevin. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, thanks for the presentation. Just piggybacking off the last question, I was just curious if there's been any conversation as you're crafting this legislation, just pairing it with like Prop 123 funds to help offset costs, if there's any sort of additional programs that are being contemplated that might roll out to help, pay for some of these types of improvements.
Yeah. So I think that, first of all, this is, like the code that would be required, so that not necessarily developing new policy per se. I mean, I guess it is building policy, but it's not like legislation. It's actually, what the code requirements would be. I think we have been working very closely with DOLA and with CHFA and other, affordable housing financing organizations to try to align requirements and create more consistency across what all of those funding sources are trying to seek, so that there is directive of essentially, projects that are trying to meet these higher standards would be more attractive to, be able to seek those funds. And so I think from that perspective, there is an effort to try to create alignment there. In terms of creating funds just to offset the higher costs that would be associated with construction, in all cases, I don't think that there is any program that would necessarily address that directly. But just, I guess I would just reemphasize that we are trying to make sure that there is consistency across the different affordable housing funding mechanisms to encourage this type of development.
Thank you.
If I could just chime in a little, I pasted the link in the chat there, but just in full recognition that yes, the challenge of sometimes going for the higher energy efficiency and the higher building codes can add cost to a project. But because it is such a priority for the governor, the legislature across Colorado, it is also a priority in our funding and scoring criteria for all the Prop 123 funding programs. So the link I pasted is just DOLA, but you'll find that over at the CHFA OEDIT funding programs, they do have similar, your project will score higher if you've built in higher building codes or energy efficiency efforts. So just leave it there. Yeah, Philip, go ahead.
Well, sorry, Philip, just one quick comment before your question. I also just wanted to add into that it's very hard to quantify some of the additional benefits that are associated with energy efficiency. So when we talk about some of those health and safety benefits and comfort benefits, it's really hard to put a dollar amount to the reduction in pollen in your air, in your indoor air, right? Because some people are going to be affected by that much more significantly than others. And so I think we also have to be careful about only trying to talk about how much money am I saving from the energy that I'm not using, but we also need to factor in that, you might be reducing the medication that you need to take, the visits you're making to medical facilities, the kinds of costs that are associated with those types of conditions that these energy codes are actually helping, reduce. And so it is hard for us to put numbers to, but it doesn't mean that those aren't factors that are contributing to cost savings as well. Sorry, Philip, didn't mean to cut you off. Just wanted to make sure I got that in there.
Yeah, no, thanks. Phil Kleisler, I'm with the city of Lafayette. And this kind of maybe just continues what you were just saying, but we adopted the 2021 codes, I think it was last year, and we did all electric for like new subdivisions and replats. So with some exemptions, but A lot of the conversations we had with our council, there was a lot of interest in the cost, the hard cost, and as it relates to affordable housing. So if y'all are doing this, I see you're also doing a model green code. It would be super helpful to just have some handouts on those so that there's some like just solid messaging from the state about what those are. And one of the things that you could also consider that really helped in our conversations was just the conversation around equity. And so when looking at like EV charging stations and upping the requirements for multifamily, upping the efficiency requirements for multifamily, since renters can't really do those things, that was also talking points that kind of resonated with the community and with council. So any support you can provide on that front would be super helpful, I think. So.
Thanks, Philip. Absolutely. And I will note that obviously because this code is currently in development, we haven't been able to actually collect a lot of the data on the hard costs yet because there isn't a firm determination of exactly what the code will require yet. But we do plan to do that and have that data available. Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing many other immediate questions here. So I did kind of want to turn to just, oh, sorry.
I mean, we have one in the chat. I think it might be pretty related to the last question, but I don't know if there's more to add to that.
Yeah, so for purposes of the recording, let's go ahead and read the question aloud. Katie asks, Adam, do you have any analysis of initial cost of energy requirements versus life cycle cost savings?
We do have analysis already that is publicly available. It's not necessarily ours. It was developed by the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory for Colorado, specifically relating to the 2021 energy codes. So those are currently available now, and that's Colorado's minimum energy code right now. So that information would be very directly tied to our current energy codes. And then, as I was saying, once we have a clearer picture of what the newer energy codes are requiring, we intend to do a similar analysis. I can look for that PNNL information. I'll have to go find the link to it. I don't have it immediately right in front of me, but we can share that with Robin, and she can share that in the email update that you all receive at the end.
So we just have, we do still have time for more discussion. So I just want to encourage any local governments, or sometimes we have housing developers on these calls, nonprofits. Please share any challenges you've had or share what resources would be helpful, like Phil was sharing. Do you need handouts? Do you need more technical assistance? Any input you'd like to share with the state? I know we've had some great projects across the state that do achieve net zero and high energy. Anyone from those communities want to share what that experience was like getting that through?
Can I ask a question that's maybe not related to that last statement? This is Katie. I'm from the city of Colorado Springs. What we're hearing from our developers here is that the like maintenance costs of these electrification requirements is really kind of throwing their performance upside down, just because we don't have they just don't have skilled labor quite yet to be able to maintain these new technologies. How are you seeing that play out elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's an issue that we've been trying to deal with, frankly, across a lot of fronts in the state right now, where the workforce is not necessarily in place to sufficiently address all of these new technologies. We are working concurrently on a number of different efforts to try to train and upskill contractors. So in terms of the actual contractor community, the Energy Office has secured funds and is actually working on developing a number of programs to upskill contractors specifically for electrification, so that there would be within the contractor community more skilled labor available, so that would reduce wait times that buildings are seeing when it comes to maintenance or installations, and also increase the knowledge base and skill base of those contractors to ensure that we are sufficiently addressing the need to have people who are skilled in installation and maintenance of these electric systems.
Great, thank you.
I saw someone else who's dropped their hand. I'm not sure who it was.
It was me,
Okay.
Adam. Hi, my name's Lauren Boyette. I'm with City of Fort Morgan. I'm on City Council. So from a council perspective, I'm not a development specialist. I do quite a bit of work with nonprofits and housing, but I had a couple of questions. One was you had thrown out a number, you said $5,000 for those initial first cost implications. Was that 5,000 like just throwing a number at it, or is that kind of a number associated with that 3,000 square foot new construction
Yeah,
cost?
so that 5,000 number was just for the purposes
Okay.
of just trying to demonstrate a number.
Okay.
I think, you know, the first cost implication of energy codes is very dependent on kind of what your baseline comparison is. If you're talking about the 2021 energy code and your baseline is the 2003 energy code, then obviously, you know, there's a much larger significant first cost, but there's also a much larger energy savings
Right.
benefit from that versus if you're talking about the 2021 code to the 2018 code. It's a much different conversation. So we see first costs, generally speaking, ranging anywhere from, you know, $1,500, depending on the climate and the community, all the way up to, you know, and that's compared to like, you know, the 2021 code versus if you're on a newer code already versus, you know, in other communities, it might be somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 or more if you're talking about a community going to comparing 2021 to like 2006 standards, 2009 standards. But also, you know, you're talking about $150 maybe in energy savings in that first example versus maybe $1,000, $1,200 of annual energy savings in that second example. So, you know, the costs do vary and dependent on, you know, what code you're comparing to, but the energy savings do as well.
Great, that's helpful. And then I just had another question about how, I think we're talking specifically new construction, but are there implications in this for for remodel permits, like when people are moving into remodeling or significant improvements?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the energy code is going to focus largely on new construction, and the whole of all of the energy code requirements apply in new construction, but there are some requirements as well for what they call, you know, technically defined terms in the energy code, additions and alterations. So if you're adding like something onto the home, generally speaking, anything you're adding onto the home is considered new construction and
Okay.
thus has to be built to code. If you are altering the home, then there's kind of if you are altering certain aspects or if you're altering a certain percentage of the floor area, kind of either or, then you have to bring certain things up to a certain standard, not always necessarily full code standard. But so like, for example, if you're ripping out drywall and you're ripping out insulation, the code would require that you bring those walls up to the minimum code required levels of insulation. That's just like one example. And so there are implications for retrofits, but generally speaking, it more comes in the space of if you're really overhauling, like, you know, if you're doing a bathroom reno, chances are there's probably not energy code requirements. If you're completely gutting a house and redoing it, there probably are.
And I assume our code people would know that. And the last thing I would say from the rural perspective is what I hear from our residents and people in my ward when they talk about costs of utilities and such is that rural urban, that a lot of times I'll hear, you know, the state is forcing us. We're home rule, you know, municipality. We should be controlling our own, those kinds of arguments. So
Sure.
it's always good to have something to come back with, you know, to say we're all in this together. You know, sometimes these things are being set for a overall improvement, and you know, we're going to have to suffer some costs too, but we're a part of the whole also.
Yeah. And what I will say is that there are also, I think, a number of benefits from having, you know, jurisdictions across the state moving forward in a more consistent fashion. And I think even for the industry, you know, yes, there are costs associated with doing this. No one's disagreeing on that point. But there are also cost savings by having, you know, a builder who may work in Fort Morgan and may work in Sterling and may work in, wherever else on the Eastern Plains, it benefits those, builders, developers, contractors to have consistent codes to work with so that they don't have to be like, okay, well, if I'm building in Fort Morgan, here's what I have to do. But if I'm building in Sterling, here's a completely different set of requirements that I have to meet, right? Consistency helps with understanding, it helps with time, and all of those things contribute. If we can be building projects faster, if we can be having a better understanding of what requirements exist, all of those reduce costs of construction, reduce timelines and all of those things. So there's that benefit as well, even though I agree, we've heard a lot of concerns about the home rule issue, but there's also a lot of benefits to consistency. Larry, you want to go ahead?
You bet. This is Larry Lucas. I'm the architect for the Colorado Main Street program. And recently we've been working in a high mountain Main Street community on a net zero redevelopment of an old building. It's not housing related, but my question is, what about doing net zero through an energy performance contract for an existing housing development that's publicly owned, or an adaptive reuse of, say, a downtown Main Street building on a second floor, using an energy performance contract to do those upgrades? Have you seen anything like that?
I'm not as familiar with the specific projects that we have done energy performance contracts for. That's another team in the energy office. But I am familiar with a number of energy performance contracts that have addressed affordable housing. I don't know if it comes to like converting, for example, what you were talking about, Larry, like, transitioning a building that may not have been housing to housing. I think that there certainly could be opportunities for that. But frankly, I'm not as much of the expert on EPC, so I would defer that question a little bit to some of my other colleagues.
Okay. Well, I mean, I could just, I have a little bit of a growing regard for this process, working with an ESCO to essentially form a contract with them, and then eventually to get a loan to pay for the work. It pays itself off through the energy savings. And so it's something to explore, and they even help you with writing grants a lot of times. So it's, it's something to look at. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you're talking about existing buildings or existing housing that you're wanting to either convert to affordable housing or upgrade, that's certainly a way to do it in a very essentially cost neutral approach. The energy savings pay for the investments. And so really there is limited or no first cost, which is one of the highest benefits of that.
All right, I'm going to jump in, folks, because we are almost at the top of the hour so that people aren't late to their next meetings. Thank you so much to our presenters for making time today, for all of you. Hope everyone learned a lot and you have an ongoing opportunity to give feedback. Next month in February, the plan is to feature Prop 123 regional collaboration examples. So where we have multi-jurisdictional collaboration on Prop 123 implementation efforts, that's what we're featuring. We've got different examples from opposite sides of the state. I believe March is, we're looking at water planning, water supply issues, and how it relates to affordable housing. And then talking about housing planning, like housing needs assessments and housing action plans, likely in our April session. So thank you again for joining us. The recording, the slides, all the links that were shared in the chat today will go out in an email today or tomorrow. And slides and recording do get posted to our Housing Strategies Peer Exchange webpage on the DOLA website. So again, thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Take care. Bye.